Welcome back to our day 5, our final lesson of the free week in software quality assurance testing offered by the Skillville Academy. We have learned so many topics throughout the week. Let's take a look at every topic from Monday to Friday, pretty much. So day 1, we looked into software testing. If you missed any of those lessons, recordings are available. I highly recommend that you rewatch the lessons and take notes and ask questions. You can still ask questions. We're available in Telegram. Day 1, we looked into the fundamentals of testing. Some very important concepts in testing have been covered, such as being very attentive to requirement documentation and what to do if there are no requirements. Such questions are asked during the interviews. So day 2, we looked into software bugs, right? We were introduced to the Azure DevOps test management tool, defect tracking tool, and we created our first test case. We created our first bug report, and we talked about bug lifecycle, how the defect actually goes back and forth between the tester and the developer until it gets closed. Okay, so that's a whole or let's say a big part of being a tester. So you're not only responsible for uncovering or finding, detecting, and preventing the defects, but at the same time, it's also your responsibility to track them, to keep an eye on them, and communicate better with the developers so that those defects that you reported, they get fixed and closed, right? If you just create them and then you never track them, you might get into timeline issues because everybody's busy in the organization. Developers, they have multiple projects running at the same time. They're usually busier than you are as a tester. So developers might see the defect that you just reported. They get a notification, but they might actually forget, right? But it will be your responsibility to track, to maybe call a meeting, to reach out to them, ask about the timeline, when to expect the defects to be fixed, so that you can go back and get the new version of the software, as we call it, the build, right? New build of the software and retest, basically, rerun your test cases and make sure that they are fixed and close. Okay. All right, day 3, we learn how to write SQL queries. We learn how to write SQL queries and how to get information from the database tables. We compared the database and the tables to the Microsoft Excel, by the way, right? And I mentioned several times that in learning process, try to simplify. Try to find the best way that works out for you to grasp, to understand the concept. Okay, sometimes you have to compare to another tool. Sometimes you have to take the same information but from another source. So whatever works for you, it's just don't leave basically just with some doubts or unanswered questions. Yesterday, we looked into Python programming language, and we wrote our first lines of code in Python, right? We learned how to write hello world, and we looked into the Visual Studio Code. Today, by the way, we're going to use Visual Studio Code and Python to interact with the web applications. And we will also talk about why we need test automation, why test automation is highly in demand, and it actually will continue to be in demand in the future. All right. Okay, so here's what we're going to do today. We're going to learn how to automatically launch the browser. Instead of just clicking the browser icon, how to write a code that will automatically open the browser. That's something that we're going to try to do. We're also going to learn how to go to a specific web page. After you launch the browser, your next step in manual testing as well would be go to this web page, right? Go to Google, or let's say you're testing Amazon, go to amazon.com and then input your username, input your password, and click login, right? So the same steps basically, but using automation. How can we interact with the specific web elements on the web page? First, we need to find them. We need to find web elements such as buttons or input fields. Let's simplify it and just call them as elements, right? Any colorful elements or graphical user interface elements such as buttons or drop downs, anything that you see on the screen basically can be located, and I'll show you how to, right? I'll show you how to find the elements on the web page. And we'll learn how to send some text to the browser. Usually you would just type in, right? But then instead of that, we'll learn how to send that information to the browser so that it automatically types the letters, characters for you. All right, we'll learn how to click, and also we'll learn how to close the browser. So this is how test case or test automation starts and ends for each test case. So every test case, every automated test case should start by opening the browser and then end with closing the browser. It actually makes sense. So usually don't keep the browser open all the time and then just run all of your test cases. That's really not a good practice. The good practice is that you have to build it and destroy it. And we call it as a setup and tear down. So you open the browser, you go to a web page, and you perform all the test steps automatically, and then you basically tear down everything that you have created. That means just close the browser and then start from scratch for each separate test case. All right. Here's the question: why do we automate at all? Right? So let's ask this from the audience. So what do you think are the main reasons why companies, organizations are looking for automation, or why would they actually automate something that can be done manually? What do you think? You can just put it into the chat and we'll take it from there. Okay, yeah. So it's more efficient. And it is faster. I'm reading your comments. Okay, so it's gonna reduce time and resource. So you don't have to spend that many resources, right? When we say resources, we're talking about people. That people are also, the employees are also resources. It actually saves money. It saves time. Correct? Yeah. Good. You guys are right on the spot, right? So we're talking about time, money, and resources, right? So, and all of these that we're mentioning here, those three important factors are limited in the organization. And so money is limited, the budget is limited, right? And the time is limited. There are always timelines, deadlines in the organization, and they need to meet the deadlines. The product has to be released. A new version of the software has to go to production. That means available to the end users, right? It has to be available by March, by April, and so on, right? Some of the organizations have every month a certain a deadline, a release, like a cutoff time. So that's when the new version of the software has to be delivered or demoed or demonstrated basically to the end users to get some feedback from the end users. So there's always time constraint. And also the resources. So the organizations, they don't have unlimited number of manual testers, and of course unlimited amount of budget to pay for the manual testers, right? That's why they try to be more efficient. So every company is trying to be more efficient. Now especially with the introduction of the generative AI, it's still in beta format and phase, and it's still developing. It's still in the initial phase of introduction, but still there's a hope, or there's a sometimes misunderstanding by the managers and the corporations as well, that that's it, now we can do everything with AI, or we have to basically be as efficient as possible, and they're looking to maximize the efficiency in the organization, right? By all means, basically, right? By cutting costs, by cutting the budget, and then by automating as much as possible. So right now in the market, if you look, there's a high demand in automation testers, and and even in subspecialties of software testing, such as ETL testing, or sometimes even for manual testers, they start mentioning nice to have knowledge of programming skills and so on, right? So this is on the rise, and it's going to be highly in demand, basically, the automation testing. Okay, now another strong reason for automation testing, or for why organizations use test automation, is because of the regression testing. So what is regression actually? Let's answer this question. What is regression? Regression means that developers, when they're fixing the code, might unintentionally create or cause a new defect. When they're fixing the issues, they might actually introduce new issues. Make sense? So basically, when you're trying to fix something, but then you break, right? You fix something, but then again, and you break the other part of the application. That's possible. That's a human factor, and that has to be taken into account. That's usually the case. Actually, it's usually the case, and therefore, testers, as testers, we perform regression testing. What is regression testing? Regression testing is that rerunning, basically, the test cases that already passed. So you have some test cases that passed, right? So you test the login, it's working fine, and you tested some other functionality, it was also working fine, but then again, you reported a bunch of defects, and those defects and bugs have been fixed, right? They were fixed. You retest, you close them, but again, how about the other functionalities that were passing, they were working before, right? Maybe they're not working anymore, because while the developers were actually fixing or changing the code, right? They're touching the code, basically. When they're touching the code, they might accidentally cause something. They might change a line of code without understanding, because they might not clearly remember what they typed in, because the application code just goes like lines and lines of thousands of lines of code, and they may unintentionally, of course, introduce something new. And the only way to catch such defects would be just running a bunch of test cases again and again, right? It passed, great, it passed now, but it might fail tomorrow, right? So that means we need to keep a huge amount of automated regression test cases. All the test cases that passed, they have to be rerun, re-executed again and again. Let's say maybe at the end of every 2 weeks, right? Every 2 weeks, or every 3 weeks, all those test cases that passed has to be re-executed. Now imagine just doing all of this manually. It will be impossible, right? So because the number of test cases keep increasing, and you literally won't have enough time to rerun all of the test cases. So that's one of the very strong reasons why test cases are automated, why manual test cases are gradually converted into automated test cases. Okay. All right, so that's one of the solutions to handle regression issue, basically. Now, what exactly do we automate? We automate the test steps. If you remember on day one, in Azure DevOps, we created our first test case and our test steps. Those test steps were open the browser, go to a web page, right? Click or input text. Those are test steps, basically. Actions. So those actions can be automated. What else do we automate? We also automate the comparison process. Remember, when we define testing, when we define software testing, when we defined a bug, we said we compare, right? We compare the expected conditions with the actual behavior of the application. So that comparison can also be automated, so that it's not you who's manually just looking at the screen and then comparing the expected condition and actual condition, but it's the computer and it's your script, right? It's your automated Python script along with Selenium or any other library that will do the comparison, and then it will make a decision. And then it will make a decision to pass or to fail your test cases and take screenshots, right? You could take the screenshots manually, but imagine that, how much time it would take, right? So automated script can take screenshots, and I'm going to show you how. And you can also generate test reports, right? That's a bit more complex, but it comes with the test automation practice. That's something that we're going to show as part of the bootcamp, to generating test reports. Okay. Now that brings us to the first step or fundamentals of test automation. In order to be able to interact with the browser, interact with any web application, first you need to understand how the web applications are built, right? Imagine, so we're talking about just going to Google, let's say, going to Google, and then you see, this search bar or search text area in Google. How can we send some text? How can we send some text into that, for example, input box, into that search bar? How can we do that? In order to perform such action, first you need to understand how that element is structured. And actually, it's not difficult. And I'm going to show you how. Okay. So elements on any web page, on any web application is like Lego blocks, basically, right? They're like Lego blocks, but the language, the very, very simple language that's used to build those blocks is referred to as HTML. Developers, actually, if you study to become a developer, that's one of the things that you learn, HTML. Actually, it's a fun language, not complex. It's nowhere near Python or anything. It's very, very simple. And you don't have to study HTML too much. We're going to introduce a little bit of HTML so that you can understand how the elements are structured. So let's take a look. If we go to google.com, for example, and we're talking about this particular search bar, right? How can we automatically send some text into this text field, or we refer to this as an input field where you can just input some text? The way to do this is that first you're going to right click, right? You can be on any browser, basically. And there should be an option to inspect. You see, it's usually the last option. So you're going to right click and go ahead and then see this option that says inspect. So when you do this, when you inspect, you will see, it might show up on the right-hand side, even at the bottom, doesn't really matter, okay? Doesn't matter. So this area, or what you see on the screen is as a half of your browser, is referred to as a developer tools. Every browser has developer tools, because this is usually not for the end users. This is for more for like IT professionals. Right? So here you can see how every element is structured. And the language here that's used is the HTML. So if you go all the way on top, it starts with the HTML, and we refer to these elements as tags, HTML tags. Okay, and the way it's structured is that there's a HTML. It's like a parent tag, the parent element, and then there's a head, like a header, right? And then there's a body. Usually a head contains information such as the title of the page. Here you see it says Google on top, or here it says interview skill reel or lesson 5. Those are the titles of the whole page. This goes into the head. And everything on the page that you see here, this the Google picture or the about store, all of this goes under the body, right? And if you expand it, then there are so many elements. If I start going through them, it actually highlights too, right? You see, it highlights. And there's a really good inspector, like an object spy in the left-hand side. If I click on this, I can actually go ahead and then inspect a specific element and then click on it, and it will go ahead and find this particular element for me. So you see that it says this is a text area. This element is referred to or called as a text area. So that, right, so we're going to keep it simple. This is what the HTML looks like. And this probably is the first thing that you need to understand and learn in order to be able to interact with the web applications. You're looking inside the web application basically, right? So now you know, okay, so this particular text area is located here. So now we're going to learn how to send some text and some information into this text field. Okay. All right. Now with this, let's move on. Here's what we're going to do today. We're going to launch the browser. That's a very, very simple workflow or a scenario, basically, right? We're going to launch the browser. We're going to go to a web page, and then we'll find the elements, just like I showed you. Going to the HTML, but we're going to include it in our code, and then we're going to perform some action. And the tools that we will be using, first of all, Python programming language. That programming language will be installed on your computer, right? It's open source. Anyone can install it themselves independently, but we provide you instructions. That's apart from that, we'll use Selenium. What is Selenium? Selenium is a library of Python. Okay, Selenium is one of the libraries of Python. So what's a library? Think of library as like additional features or power-ups of the Python, of the programming language. If you ever played a game like computer games, in computer games as well, you usually have like a base game itself, and then you get power-ups like additional features, right? So just like the library is also power-ups for a programming language. So if you want to perform a specific, very specific, like industry-specific action or functionality, then you need to download those libraries, additional libraries, and we're going to show you how. And that's also, there's nothing complex in downloading or installing them. And of course, we're going to use the Visual Studio Code. Okay. All right. So with that, let's go ahead and then launch our Visual Studio Code. Okay, so we're looking at the Visual Studio Code right here. All right. Now, so as I mentioned in the previous sessions, in Visual Studio Code, in the left-hand side, you have the files you have the file section. So I have this one file here, Python file, and on the right-hand side, this is a code editor. It's a code editor, right? And then you have your terminal. So today I'm going to show you how to write a code interactively so that you can see in a live approach how you can just create the browser, just launch the browser, and then interact with the browser while you're writing a code, right? So that's probably the best way to understand this. So the first step, very first step, would be we're going to in our terminal, right? In our terminal, I'm going to go ahead and run my Python file. But so you don't have to worry about what I'm typing in at the moment. Just think of it as I'm launching my Python file, and then so that I can interact with what I have in my Python file. First of all, then I can write some commands. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and run. And what I just did was I executed my Python file, and then I entered what's referred to as an interactive Python terminal. Now I'm inside the Python terminal. Actually, inside Python terminal, I can write code, and then that will interact with the browser. Okay, what you have here on top is that those are the libraries that I talked about earlier. Okay, the libraries that I spoke about earlier, and we're going to explain those as part of the bootcamp, of course. But for now, just focus on at the bottom. We talked about variables in the previous lesson, so we're going to create a variable called browser. We're going to create a variable called browser. So browser equal to the Firefox, basically. Think of it that way, okay? You'll remember in the previous session, we said like A equals 10 or B equals 20, and a message equals to welcome to a Python lesson and so on. So just like that, we're creating a variable. This time we call it a browser. I could call it anything, right? We're going to call it a browser to keep it simple so that you can relate. You can understand this is actually a browser. And we're going to make it equal to WebDriver.Firefox. Okay? WebDriver is, again, this is what we took from the library. This is like the power up that I spoke earlier. It's a framework that helps us to interact with the browser. So when I perform this, WebDriver.Firefox, it's basically going to, when I hit enter, just pay attention, it's going to launch the Firefox browser. Okay, see that? So I did not launch this manually. I mean, at this moment, of course, I executed the script manually, but the Firefox is opened automatically. Do you see, just pay attention on the left-hand side right here. Do you see this a little robot head in the left-hand side of the browser? So that means that, and if you hover over, it will actually tell you what that means. Browser is under remote control. Browser is under remote control. So that means that the browser is right now being controlled, right? So we're going to put it on the right-hand side. So we're going to put this side by side so you can see. So the browser is right now being controlled by a script. That's what it means. Okay. All right. So that was the first step. So take a look at this. So browser, and then I can go ahead and just hit the browser, hit enter, and it will tell me that this is the Selenium.WebDriver.Firefox. Okay. So it's basically telling us that, okay, this element that you have here is the one version of the browser, Firefox, that we have here. So what can we do with this? We can check the name of the browser. We can check the name of the browser. So as you can see, I just typed in browser.name, browser.name. Okay, and it tells me it's a Firefox. Okay, and can we get to a web page from here? Let's try. So browser dot get, right? So when we use dot, right? Dot is referred to as a dot notation, and this is a way to get to the functions or actions that you can perform within the browser, okay? Within the browser. So you can get the name of the browser. If it was a Chrome, or if it was Opera or Safari, it will tell that it's Opera or Safari, right? When I say browser.name. And if I want to go to a specific web page, I use the get function within the browser. So I say browser.get, right? And get me to, right? I want to navigate to a Google. Let me copy the google.com web address. This should be the web address of google.com. So pay attention. This HTTPS and then google.com is written within the quotation mark. And this is what you remember from your previous Python lesson, that this is a text. This is a string, right? This is what we refer to as a string. So if I had hit enter now, the web page on the right-hand side is supposed to get to the google.com. Okay, here we go. See that? Okay. So far, you'll learn how to launch the browser. Okay, it was right here. Browser equals to webdriver.firefox. So this line of code opened the browser. It just opened the new version or instance, as we call, of the browser, specifically the Firefox. But I could open Chrome, or I could open any other browser, like an Edge in my computer as well. And then the next step that we learned was how to go to a specific web page. And it's also straightforward, browser.get. Browser.get. But of course, there is specific syntax that you have to follow, such as if you open parentheses, make sure you close the parentheses. If you start with a single quote, make sure you end with a single quote, right? Just like we studied in the in our Python lesson. Otherwise, you would get a syntax error, right? You would get a syntax error. So what is the next step? The next step is, before we enter anything into the text area, let's learn some additional features of the browser. So now I can, let's check its name again. It's still Firefox, right? Now I can also check browser.title. Browser.title. Look what it says. It says Google. You see? It's returned Google. And this is coming from all the way, you see at the top of this web page, at the top, the name of the tab or the name of the page or the title of the page is Google. This is where it's checking. Okay, this is where it's coming from. And if you were working for Google, let's say, obviously you have to make sure that the correct value, correct information is also displayed on top here, so that there are no typos, and it's also as expected. It's also as expected. Now, if I were to check this particular value, I would use double equal sign. I will use double equal sign. Double equal sign is a comparison operator. It's a comparison operator, right? It checks, is it actually equal to Google? Okay, so as you can see here, I typed in browser.title, double equal, that's I'm comparing to the actual value. So, and if I hit, the result is true. It says yes, right? It's confirming, yes, this is correct. So it's basically, this is like we're getting closer to comparing your expected conditions to the actual result. Okay, my expected condition that it's supposed to be Google, but the actual result is coming from browser.title. Now imagine if my expected condition was Gmail, right? My expected condition was not Google, but rather maybe welcome to Google or something, right? If it was like a welcome to Google, then it will be false. See? The result is now false. If I compare, it says, well, no, the title is not equal to Welcome to Google, it's equal to Google. Make sense? Okay. So we learn how to look into the name of the browser, the title of the browser or title of the page, and you can also get the current web address or current URL. URL is short for web address, basically. Okay, but it stands for Uniform Resource Locator. So browser.current URL, and I hit enter. You see, looks familiar. You see that you basically have access to everything. Through Python and Selenium, you have access to pretty much all the information that you see on the right-hand side on the web page. So I have access to this title on top. I have access to this web address. Okay, you see that? That's a web address. Now the next step for us would be to find the elements. That's a important skill that every automation tester should have, which is finding the elements. So how can we find the elements? To find the elements, again, as I showed you, you're going to right click and inspect. Okay, you're going to right click and inspect, and then you will see this particular element. So it's highlighted right here, right? So we're highlighting, we're making sure, okay, this is a web element. Now, every web element has some features, has some, and we refer to them as attributes. Has some attributes, such as if you look closer, it has an ID attribute right here. It says ID equal to and some collection of data. And if you keep looking, there are other attributes such as its name is equal to letter Q, right? So its ID is APF and some random collection of data, and its name is equal to letter Q. And we're going to use those attributes, the description of this particular element to find this element, to catch this element, so that we can perform some actions on it, okay? This is how it works, basically. And to catch this element, we're going to use the find element function. Find element function. So it would be browser dot find. You see, instead of saying browser dot get would take us to a web page, but browser dot find element will look for an element, right? We'll search for elements on the page. And there are different ways of searching. We can search by ID, we can search by name, and for this particular example, we're going to search by name. Okay, so the name is available here. So we're going to search by name, and the name attribute right here, as you can see, its name is equal to Q. So we're going to use the Q right here. So just like that. However, we want to save this web element, just like we saved the browser, right? Remember, we took the Firefox and save it into the browser variable. Just like that, we want to find this element and then save it into a variable set, and we're going to call it search field. Okay, so search field is equal to the result of finding the element, right? So we found the element, and then we're going to save this element into the container called search field. Okay, make sense? And we're going to hit enter. That's it. If you don't get any error messages, in this case, that means that your script worked. If you made any syntax errors, or if you couldn't find the element, you're going to get an error message. Okay. And as I spoke about yesterday, so error messages are a way to learn how to debug. Let's continue. So search field. So we found the search field. Now the next step would be, into this particular search field, we can go ahead and close what we opened here, right? It's still there. We're going to enter some text. Now we're going to enter some text. So search field, send keys. See, so far you learned how to open the browser, which was like with the browser.get, or how to find the element, browser.findElement. But now you're interacting with the specific element, right? Search field. So search field dot send keys. Send keys means just send some keyboard actions. So we're entering some text, basically. We're sending some text to the browser. Okay, so send keys. So what do we want to search? Let's say we want to search QA interview questions, right? QA interview questions. That's what we want to send to the text area right here. So if I hit enter, it's supposed to send this information, this text into this field. Okay, there we go, just like that. See that? Okay, so far we've been doing everything automatically, like you would do manually, but we're doing this rather writing a script in the terminal. But in the actual test automation, all this script that you see here would go to the top area right here. Okay, but for learning process, just to show you this, how every line of code works step by step, this is the way that we're basically teaching, because this way you're going to understand better. Okay, now what's the next step? We also need to hit enter here, right? So after, usually in your computer, what would you do? You write something and then you're gonna go ahead and hit your enter. So to hit enter in this search field, we have a function called submit, like a submission. Okay, so search field dot submit. So if I go ahead and hit enter, here we go. Okay, on the right hand side, it just searched and we have our results. So it's perfect. Okay, so that's a good thing. And can we take screenshots? Yes, we can. To take screenshots, the approach here would be browser dot save screenshot. Right, most of the methods or functions that you will be using actually make sense. As you can see, there wasn't anything weird in what we were typing in. Everything was more, very close to English, right? So browser.get basically, or browser.current URL just to get the current web address, or browser.findElement to find a particular element, such as to find the button or to find the input field. Send keys, right, to enter some text, to send some key basically means those key presses on your keyboard. That's why it's called as a key. So but that's the send keys is basically enter some text. And browser.save screenshot. If we want to save a screenshot, we also need to mention the name of the file, right? Screenshot is usually like a file, like an image file. So every image file, it needs to have a name. So we're going to go ahead and type in the name of the image file. So save screenshot, we'll say Google_search.png, for example, right? Now, pay attention to the left-hand side. Do you see that I have just two files here? So freeweek.py and then geckodriver.log. This is automatically generated file. So certain files are generated like they're system generated files. So this is that kind of file. It's just a log of what's happening behind the scenes. Now, if I hit enter now, in the left-hand side, we should see a new file. Okay, so I'm gonna run, and you see it says Google_search.png. This was just created right at the moment. If I click on it and take some time, here we go. You see that? This is a screenshot that we just saved using Python and Selenium. Make sense? Okay. Now, with the same approach, we can go to a different web page as well, right? So what we learned right now is we went to Google and then we searched some text, and then we clicked, submit, basically enter. And we can also go ahead to the application that you are familiar with from the date one. And let me get the link to this application, which is a shopping website. So this particular application. So I will type in browser.get and then HTTPS to sourcedemo.com. Here we go. See that? It automatically switched to another application right here. And you can also perform browser.refresh. I can also refresh the page like this, see? And I can also go back, okay? And I can also go forward, just like that, all right? And just like we did with finding the text area, we can find the username here as well. So we're gonna right-click and inspect, and take a look at this element. So it's an input element. It has an ID, right? An ID is the user dash name right here. See that? It has an ID. ID is user dash name. And if you inspect the password, you can see the ID is password here, right here. And if you inspect the login, let's click on this inspector and then click on the login. And you can see that it is login dash button. So you can use this ID and create or catch those elements. After you catch the elements, then you can perform some actions on them. So let's go ahead and try to do that. So first field that we will catch, we will find is the username, right? So username field. Username field equals to browser dot find element by ID, and the ID of the username field was user dash name. Okay, you hit enter. If you don't get any error messages, that means that it's perfectly working fine. And you can also use the up arrow and down arrow in your keyboard to go to the previous commands. So as you can see, I'm just going to the previous command, and I will change it. This time it's not username field, but it's the password field, right? Because we need the password field. For the password field, the ID is, let's check again from the right-hand side, right here, ID is the password. So I'm going to just type that in. You could also copy and paste. And hit again, works perfectly fine to me, right? It works fine. Now, login button. So the next element that we need to interact with is the login button, right? So we will say login button. So I'm creating variables. Pay attention. So all we're doing is that in the left-hand side, the variable name, such as login button, and on the right-hand side, the script to find this element. Okay, so browser.find element by ID, and the ID here is the login dash button, right? So we'll type that in ourselves, login dash button, and hit enter. Okay, all good. So far, so good. Now, so what is the next step after we found all those three elements? What's the next step? Now we want to enter some text, right? We want to enter some text. So let's start with the username. If I go ahead and type in username dot send keys and then enter test, it should enter test right here. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and hit enter, and then we might have, oh, here we go. Okay, this is a great example of how we can read the error messages. As you can see, we just received an error message that says name error, username is not defined. Username is not defined. That's because we created our variable as a username underscore field. Okay, makes sense? You see? And as part of a regular, coding process, you're going to receive such error messages. So instead of saying username, we have to say username underscore field, just like we created. And send keys test. Okay, now as you can see on the right-hand side, the test text has been entered. Now we're going to go ahead, instead of entering any value into the password field, we're going to keep the password field as blank. We're going to keep the password field as blank for a negative testing, right? For negative testing, we're testing the unexpected scenarios, basically. So we're going to click on the login button. So I will type in login underscore button and click, .click, okay? Now pay attention. So we will automatically click on this login button, and our expected condition is that there has to be some error message. So take a look. So we got the error message. It says password is required, right? Password is required. And that's your expected condition, basically, right? That is our expected condition. And you can also clear the fields as well. So for the username, if we go back to the username field, we can also clear what we just entered. So username underscore field dot clear, you see, it just cleared all of this. Okay. And we go back and try to click the login button one more time. Now the error message is going to change. Now it says username field is required. See? Now this time, we're going to go ahead and actually enter the correct username, which is a standard user right here. That's what we're going to try to do. Okay. For the username field, we're going to enter the correct username. So take a look. We entered the correct username. And let me copy the correct password as well. Now for the password field, we're going to enter the correct password right here. Correct password is secret sauce. Here we go. We entered the correct password too. And we will go ahead and click login underscore button. Login underscore button dot click. And here we go. So we're in the browser, I mean, in the actual homepage. And we can also take a screenshot of our successful login process, right? So to take a screenshot again, browser.save screenshot, and we can say, let's say homepage.png, and take a look in the left-hand side again. You have, so far we took one screenshot, Google underscore search.png, and we're taking the second screenshot using browser.save screenshot homepage.png. And if I hit enter, I should see in the left-hand side another screenshot. And let's take a look. Click on it. We can expand our Visual Studio Code now. And you can see that this is the second screenshot that we just took. This is the first screenshot. Okay. All right. So far, right? This browser right here. By the way, you can also close this browser. You can also close this browser. And to close that browser, the code here would be browser.quit. Okay. So browser.quit. So pay attention on the right-hand side. The browser should disappear. There we go. Now it's gone. Okay. Now it's gone. So we basically went through a very basic process, with you. A very basic process of automating the interaction with the browser. So using Python and Selenium, we launched the browser, we went to a web page, we learned how to inspect the elements, right? You now kind of have a basic understanding of what HTML is. It's like a Lego element, so Lego blocks of building the web page, right? If previously you just thought, okay, this is just components, beautiful components that you see, such as buttons and text boxes and so on, drop downs. Now you can right click and inspect them, and you can see the content of those any web page, basically. Okay. All right. Now there's a lot more into test automation, of course. And the key here is to learn step by step, and we're going to cover in test automation. So I'll give you some examples. Some of the frameworks that we create as part of test automation is BDD right here, for example. It says BDD, so this is referred to as a behavior-driven development. So you're going to learn how to convert manual test cases into automated test cases in BDD test automation framework. But it's again the same Python and the same Selenium used behind the scenes, basically. Okay. We will also learn, like if you look at this pandas right here, pandas in the left-hand side, pandas is going to be used by us to automate the SQL testing process or database testing process. That's also something that we're going to show you how to automatically run. Remember the SQL queries that we were manually running? The same can be automatically executed and validated. The results can be actually validated or compared. So we can actually essentially perform ETL testing using test automation. Okay. And you see this requests right here, like an eagle. That request library is also part of Python, but so that is used for API test automation, right? So we're going to use this along with PyTest right here, as you can see.